I never thought betrayal would come from the person I loved most. Her name was Sarah. She wasn't just my best friend. She was the sister my mother never gave me. We met in college. Two young women sitting in the same classroom, both afraid of the future, both dreaming of a life that felt safe. From that day on, we became inseparable. We shared clothes. We shared secrets. We shared tears. And one day, without knowing, I would share my husband too. Back then, I didn't know his name yet. Daniel. When I first met Daniel, I was shy. He was gentle. He listened. When I told Sarah about him, her eyes sparkled. "You deserve happiness," she said. "I'm so happy for you." She stood beside me on my wedding day, fixing my dress, holding my hands while I shook with nervousness. "You're lucky," she whispered. "He's a good man." I believed her. After marriage, Sarah became a part of our home. She visited often. Sometimes she stayed for dinner. Sometimes she stayed late. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my best friend. I would leave them alone while I cooked. I would ask her advice when Daniel and I argued. I would tell her my fears, my doubts, my weaknesses. And slowly, she learned how to become me. Daniel changed too. He smiled less at me. He listened more to her. They laughed together. They shared private jokes. They looked at each other in ways I tried not to see. And still, I told myself, you are imagining things. She would never hurt you. But betrayal doesn't begin with a kiss. It begins with comfort. And I was giving her everything she needed. There's a moment in every broken story where the heart feels danger. But the mind refuses to accept it. For me, that moment came quietly. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with silence. Daniel stopped talking to me the way he used to. Our conversations became short, careful, cold. But with Sarah, he was different. His voice softened. He laughed more. He explained things to her that he never explained to me anymore. One evening, I entered the living room and found them sitting close together on the sofa. Too close. They were looking at something on his phone. When they saw me, they both pulled back. Too quickly. "Oh, it's nothing," Sarah said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I smiled back. Because that's what trusting people do. That night, I couldn't sleep. My heart felt heavy, like it was carrying a secret it didn't yet understand. I asked Daniel softly, "Are you happy with me?" He looked away. "Of course," he said. But his voice was empty. The next weeks became worse. He came home late. He was always tired, always busy. And Sarah, she was always there. Whenever I cried, she comforted me. Whenever I doubted, she calmed me. Whenever I questioned, she defended him. "He loves you," she said. "You're just overthinking." And I believed her. Because I didn't know that she was not protecting my marriage. She was slowly replacing it. I began to feel lonely inside my own home. My husband was present, but his heart was somewhere else. And my best friend was standing between us. But still, I had no proof. Only pain. And sometimes, pain is the only truth we get before everything breaks. There is a special kind of pain when your own house no longer feels safe. Not because of noise. Not because of anger. But because of the silence that hides lies. I began to notice how Daniel avoided my eyes. When I spoke, he listened. But he didn't hear. When I touched his hand, he pulled away. Gently, but clearly. And Sarah noticed everything. She noticed my tears before I spoke. She noticed my fear before I understood it. And she used it. One evening, while I was washing dishes, I heard them laughing in the living room. Real laughter. The kind Daniel no longer shared with me. I stood there, holding a wet plate, listening. And something inside me broke. Later that night, I asked Sarah, "Do you think Daniel is tired of me?" She looked at me with soft eyes and said, "No. But marriage changes people. Men need understanding. You must be more patient." Her words sounded kind, but they slowly made me feel small. I started blaming myself. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe I was not enough anymore. Daniel began staying out late. "Work," he said. But his phone was always in his hand. And when I entered the room, he locked the screen. Once, I reached for his phone. He pulled it away. Too fast. "Don't," he said sharply. Then he softened. "I'm just tired." But tired people don't hide. Guilty people do. I began to feel like a stranger in my own marriage. And my best friend was slowly becoming closer to my husband than I was. Yet I stayed silent. Because sometimes we are more afraid of the truth than the pain. It was a rainy evening. The kind of rain that makes the house smell like memories, wet wood, cold air, and loneliness. I'd been waiting for Daniel to come home for dinner. But he never did. Sarah came over instead. She smiled as she always did, but there was something different in her eyes that night. A confidence. A satisfaction that made my chest tighten. "Don't worry," she said. "He'll be back soon. He just has some work." I nodded, though I didn't understand. I didn't question it. I wanted to trust her. But later, when I went into the living room, I found their jackets together, their shoes side by side, not placed neatly like friends, and the smell of his cologne mixed with hers. A small, subtle thing, but enough to make my stomach twist. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing. But I couldn't. Over the next few days, their closeness became impossible to ignore. They shared jokes I didn't understand. He confided things to her that I had never heard before. And every time I tried to speak, it felt like I was invisible. One evening, I confronted Daniel gently. "Are you hiding something from me?" He looked startled. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Of course not," he said. But his voice was quieter than usual. I knew something was wrong. And when Sarah smiled at me later that night, offering comfort, I realized the betrayal wasn't just an action. It was in the smile I once trusted. I stayed awake that night, lying in bed, feeling like the walls of my home were closing in. The warmth I had once felt in my marriage was gone, replaced by suspicion, doubt, and fear. And yet, I couldn't leave. Because love isn't rational. Because betrayal doesn't announce itself with a warning. It creeps in, quiet, patient, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy everything you hold dear. It happened one evening that I will never forget. I came home early from work. I'd been feeling uneasy all week, a heavy weight pressing on my chest. And somehow, I knew something was wrong. The house was quiet. Too quiet. As I stepped into the living room, I froze. There they were, Daniel and Sarah, sitting side by side on the sofa. Not just talking. Not just laughing. Holding hands. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn around and leave. I wanted to tell myself I had imagined it. But the truth was there. Clear. Impossible to deny. Sarah looked up at me, startled. Her hand slowly slid from his. And Daniel? He didn't even try to hide it. I felt my heart stop. The blood in my ears roared. My hand shook. Daniel's eyes looked guilty, but not sorry. Sarah's smile was weak, but it was there. And in that moment I realized I'd lost everything I thought I had. Everything I had trusted. Everything I had loved. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Words failed me. I wanted to cry. I wanted to rage. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I left the room. I went upstairs, and I sat alone in the dark. Alone. The kind of alone that comes not from being physically alone, but from being betrayed by the people you trusted most. I lay on the bed, my mind spinning. My best friend, my sister, had stolen my husband, and I had given her the tools to do it. All the time I had defended her, comforted her, trusted her. She had been using me, and Daniel, the man I had loved. He had chosen her. For the first time in my life, I understood the meaning of true betrayal.
Days passed, but nothing returned to normal. Daniel acted as if nothing had happened. Sarah pretended everything was ordinary, and I was trapped in a home that felt like a cage. Every glance, every word, every laugh between them was a dagger in my chest. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't pretend anymore. One evening, I decided I could no longer stay silent. I had to confront them. I walked into the living room. My hands shook. My voice trembled. Daniel, Sarah, I need to know the truth. Sarah's eyes widened. Daniel looked down, avoiding my gaze. What truth? He asked, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. The truth, I said, my chest tight. The truth about what's happening between you two. Sarah's lips pressed together. Her smile faded. Her hands, which had once held mine so lovingly, now fidgeted nervously. Daniel finally looked at me. It's complicated, he said, but his voice was weak. I didn't mean for it to happen. I laughed, a bitter, shaking laugh. Complicated? Betrayal isn't complicated, Daniel. It's simple. You chose her over me. You chose your lies. You chose her. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but I stopped her. I trusted you, Sarah. I shared my life with you. I let you into my home. And this is what I get? They were silent, and in that silence, I felt my heart shatter into pieces. I walked to the door. I grabbed my coat. I need to leave, I said. They didn't stop me. They didn't try. Because the truth was undeniable, the betrayal was complete, and I had no place in that house anymore. That night, I sat in my car, staring at the rain-soaked street, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I had lost my best friend. I had lost my husband. And I had lost the life I thought I had built. All that remained was the pain, the memory of trust, and the emptiness that comes from being betrayed by the two people you loved most. The days after that confrontation were the longest of my life. I went through the motions. I ate when I had to, slept when exhaustion claimed me, but my heart had been ripped out. I avoided them both. I avoided the house. I avoided even looking at their faces. Every corner, every photograph, every memory in that house was a reminder of what I had lost. And yet, I couldn't leave completely. There were bills, responsibilities, and the strange hold of habit. I stayed because the betrayal was too raw to face fully if I left. And in staying, I felt every cut, every lie, every stolen moment replay over and over. At night, I would sit in the dark, my knees pulled to my chest, staring at the ceiling. I asked myself the same questions endlessly. Why Sarah? Why Daniel? Was I not enough? The truth was unbearable. I had given them my trust completely, and they had taken it, twisted it, and used it to destroy me from within. My friends, when I spoke to them, told me I deserved better. But it didn't help. Their words were empty echoes in a hollow heart. One evening, Sarah laughed in the living room with Daniel, just as they had that first night I saw them. But this time, it felt different. It was no longer subtle. It was open, defiant. I realized something terrifying. They didn't even feel guilty. They didn't even care. To them, I was already erased. I spent nights writing letters I never sent. Letters to Sarah, to Daniel, to myself. Letters filled with anger, heartbreak, and the kind of grief that sinks deep into your bones. I cried in the car. I cried in the shower. I cried silently in my bed. And slowly, over the weeks, a cold numbness began to replace the burning pain. Not relief, not happiness, just emptiness. I had loved deeply, trusted fully, and given my soul. And in return, I received betrayal. I realized then, for the first time, that some people are never meant to stay in your life forever. No matter how much you love them, no matter how much you trust them. Some betrayals are permanent, some wounds never heal, and some losses cannot be mended. There is a moment after deep betrayal when the pain changes its shape. It stops screaming. It stops burning. And instead, it becomes quiet. That was the most frightening part. I woke up one morning and realized I hadn't cried, not because I was healed, but because my heart was too tired to hurt anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, replaying every moment of the past few years. Every laugh, every conversation, every time Sarah held my hand and told me she loved me like a sister. Every time Daniel kissed my forehead and said, "You're my world." None of it felt real anymore. It felt like a story I once read, a story that belonged to someone else. I walked through the house slowly that day, the couch where they sat together, the kitchen where I cooked meals for all three of us, the hallway where Sarah once hugged me and thanked me for always being there. I realized something painful. They didn't just betray me in one moment. They betrayed me slowly. Every time they laughed together while I stood nearby. Every time they shared secrets and excluded me. Every time Sarah listened to my marriage problems and used them against me. I remembered the nights I cried to her. "I feel like Daniel is slipping away," I once told her. She held me close and said, "I would never hurt you. I promise." And I believed her. That promise echoed in my head now, hollow and cruel. Later that afternoon, I overheard them talking, not whispering, not hiding, talking openly, planning dinner, planning a future, as if I had already disappeared, as if my pain was no longer part of the room. I stood in the doorway, unseen, unheard. And in that moment, something inside me finally broke free. Not love, not anger. Hope. I understood then that nothing I said would bring my marriage back. Nothing I did would restore the friendship I lost. They were not confused. They were not guilty. They were comfortable. And that realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them again. I simply turned around and walked away. That night, lying alone, I whispered to myself for the first time, "This is the end, not just of my marriage, but of the woman I used to be." Because betrayal doesn't just take people from you, it takes who you were before you trusted them. There is no pain quite like continuing to live with the people who broke you. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of their voices, not raised, not angry, comfortable, as if nothing had happened. Daniel moved around the house like he still belonged there, like the vows he broke had never existed. Sarah walked in and out freely, no longer pretending to be careful around me. Her presence was everywhere, in the kitchen, in the living room, in the spaces that once felt like mine. And I existed quietly in between them, invisible. At breakfast, Daniel spoke to her about his plans, about work, about the future. He did not look at me. When he did, his eyes slid past mine as if I were a shadow on the wall. I remember one morning clearly. Sarah laughed at something he said, and without thinking, he smiled back. The smile he used to give me. That smile crushed me more than any argument ever could. I carried my coffee to the window and stared outside, pretending to be interested in the street. But inside, I was unraveling. I asked myself again and again, how did I become the outsider in my own life? Some days, I replayed memories like a punishment. The night Sarah cried in my arms after a breakup. The money I lent her when she struggled. The way I defended her when others doubted her intentions. I had protected her, only to be destroyed by her. And Daniel. I remembered our early years, the promises, the plans, the way he said my name when he thought I was asleep. Now, he said her name with ease. At night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried silently, afraid they would hear me. Not because I cared what they thought, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I started to shrink. I spoke less. I moved quietly. I learned to disappear in my own home, and in that silence, I realized something terrifying. They weren't just stealing my marriage, they were erasing my existence. Days passed like this, heavy, slow, unforgiving. And with each passing day, the truth became clearer. I was no longer part of their story. I was only a reminder of what they had taken. One day, I caught my reflection in the mirror, and I didn't recognize her. Her eyes were dull. Her shoulders slumped. Her face carried a sadness that no makeup could hide. That woman was me. But she was not the woman I used to be. Before the betrayal, I laughed easily. I spoke freely. I trusted deeply. Now, I measured every word, every movement, every breath. I stopped asking questions, because I already knew the answers. I stopped hoping, because hope had become too painful. Some mornings, I stayed in bed long after the sun had risen. Not because I was tired, but because getting up meant facing the reality I was trying to survive. I remembered the woman I was when Daniel first loved me. The way I believed in us. The way I believed in people. That woman felt like a stranger now. Sarah passed me in the hallway one afternoon and said softly, "I never wanted to hurt you." Her words felt empty. If she never wanted to hurt me, why did she stay? Why did she smile while standing beside him? Why did she live so comfortably inside the ruins of my life? I didn't respond, because silence was the only power I had left. At night, I wrote in a notebook, not messages, not letters, just thoughts, pages filled with questions that had no answers. Was I too trusting? Was I too kind? Was I invisible all along? Daniel once tried to speak to me. "We didn't plan this," he said. I looked at him and felt nothing. No anger, no love, just emptiness. And that scared me more than rage ever could. Because when love disappears completely, there is nothing left to fight for. I realized then, betrayal doesn't always end with screaming or revenge. Sometimes it ends quietly, with a woman learning how to live without the people she loved most. There comes a moment when you realize you no longer belong where you are standing, not because someone tells you to leave, but because your heart understands it before your mind does. That moment came to me on an ordinary afternoon. Daniel and Sarah were sitting at the dining table, talking softly, sharing a meal I had cooked earlier that day. They didn't invite me to sit. They didn't look up. I stood there for a few seconds, unnoticed. And suddenly, it became clear. This was no longer my home. I remembered how this table once held our dreams. Late night talks, plans for the future, shared laughter. Now, It held their comfort. And I was just a shadow passing through. I returned to my room and closed the door quietly. I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, and let the truth sink in. I had not lost them in one sudden moment. I had been slowly pushed aside, day by day, smile by smile, silence by silence. That evening, Daniel knocked on my door. "I think it's better if we talk," he said. I looked at him calmly. "I think it's better if we don't," I replied, because there was nothing left to explain. No apology could restore trust. No words could undo what had already been done. He stood there for a moment, then nodded and walked away. And I felt something strange, relief. Not happiness, not peace, but relief. Relief that I no longer had to pretend. That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave forever, just to breathe. As I folded my clothes, memories fell out of the drawers. A scarf he once bought me, a letter he wrote years ago, a photo of Sarah and me smiling like sisters. I placed them back gently. Some memories don't deserve to be destroyed. They deserve to be mourned. When I turned off the light and lay down, I whispered to the darkness, "I don't belong here anymore." And the silence answered back. Leaving without answers is one of the hardest things a heart can do. I didn't announce my departure. I didn't make a scene. I didn't ask for explanations. I simply picked up my bag and walked out. The door closed behind me with a soft sound. Too soft for something that ended a life I once believed in. The air outside felt different. Colder. Heavier. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, unsure of where to go. When your home betrays you, the world suddenly feels unfamiliar. I stayed with a distant cousin for a few nights. She was kind, she didn't ask questions, and I was grateful. Because I didn't know how to explain the pain without breaking apart. At night, I lay awake on a mattress that wasn't mine, staring at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar sounds. Every noise reminded me that I no longer belonged anywhere. I checked my phone often, not because I expected messages, but because some part of me still hoped. Daniel didn't call. Sarah didn't message. Their silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. I realized then something that hurt deeply. They were not missing me. They were moving on. Days passed. I walked through parks alone. I sat in cafes alone. I ate meals without tasting them. I watched couples laugh, friends talk, families walk hand in hand, and I felt invisible, not angry, just erased. One afternoon, I opened my bag and found the old photo of Sarah and me, two young women smiling, arms around each other, believing in forever. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and put it away. Some memories don't need to be destroyed. They only need to be accepted for what they truly were. Illusions. That night, as I lay alone in the dark, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I would never get closure. There would be no explanation that made sense. No apology that healed the wound. Because betrayal rarely comes with honesty. And love once broken this deeply never returns the same. Life doesn't stop when your heart breaks. That was the hardest lesson to learn. The world kept moving. People kept laughing. Days kept passing. And I had to learn how to exist inside a life that no longer felt like mine. I found a small room to rent. It was quiet, plain, empty, just like me. I placed my bag on the floor and sat on the bed, listening to the silence. No familiar voices, no shared routines, no memories waiting around the corner. For the first time in a long while, I was truly alone. At night, my mind replayed everything. The way Sarah used to call me late at night. The way Daniel used to hold my hand while we walked. The small details that once felt ordinary now felt unbearable. I wondered if they ever thought of me, if my absence ever crossed their minds. But deep down, I already knew the answer. I started working more hours, not because I needed the money, but because staying busy was the only way to survive. When I was tired, I didn't think. When I didn't think, I didn't feel. And when I didn't feel, the pain slept quietly inside me. Some evenings, I sat by the window and watched the city lights. Each light belonged to a story, a life, a happiness that felt unreachable. I stopped telling people my story, not because I was ashamed, but because repeating it felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. One night, I whispered into the darkness. I loved them. I trusted them. And they chose each other. The words sounded strange out loud, as if they belonged to someone else. And that's when I realized something painful. This betrayal had changed me forever. I would never love the same way again. I would never trust the same way again. Some parts of me were gone, and they were never coming back. Something strange happens after deep betrayal. You stop crying every day, not because the pain is gone, but because your tears run out. I woke up one morning and realized I hadn't cried the night before. That scared me more than the tears ever did, because it meant something inside me had gone quiet. I stopped checking my phone, stopped hoping for apologies, stopped imagining explanations. Silence became my new companion. I started noticing myself again, the way I drank my coffee, the way I walked alone, the way my reflection looked back at me, older, calmer, guarded. This woman wasn't the one they broke. This woman had survived them. Sometimes memories tried to sneak back in. A song, a smell, a familiar street. But now, instead of collapsing, I breathed through it. Pain no longer screamed, it whispered. I learned that not all strength looks loud. Some strength is quiet. Some strength is getting up every day, even when your heart feels numb. I stopped blaming myself, stopped asking what I could have done differently. Because the truth finally settled in. Loyal people don't betray. Honest people don't lie. And love doesn't destroy you like that. What they did was a choice, and what I survived was proof. I didn't need closure from them. Their silence was my answer. And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped missing who they were and started mourning who I used to be. I didn't plan to see them again. Life just has a cruel way of crossing paths when you're finally learning how to breathe. I was standing in line at a small cafe, hands shaking slightly as I paid, and then I heard a voice I once trusted more than my own. I didn't turn around immediately, because sometimes your heart recognizes danger before your eyes do. But when I did turn, there they were, together, not hiding, not ashamed, just standing there like they hadn't shattered someone's world. My best friend looked older. My husband looked thinner, but neither looked sorry. They froze when they saw me, as if guilt had finally caught up. No hugs, no tears, just silence hanging between us like unfinished business. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, my husband said quietly. I nodded. I didn't think I'd survive seeing you again, I replied. My best friend tried to speak. I didn't come here to hear excuses, I said before she could finish. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. I expected anger. What I felt instead was clarity. I told them how the nights felt endless. How betrayal doesn't end relationships. It ends innocence. I told them how I questioned my worth. how trust doesn't come back the same once it's broken by the people closest to you. They cried, but their tears didn't move me. Because tears after betrayal are not remorse. They are fear of being seen. I didn't forgive them, but I didn't curse them either. I simply walked away, and in that moment, I understood something powerful. Closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from choosing yourself, even when it hurts. I walked away that day, leaving them standing in the cafe. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just me, stepping into the cold air, carrying the weight of every broken promise, every stolen smile, every lie. For the first time in years, I felt quiet, not happy, not healed, just quiet. I realized something important. Betrayal doesn't always end with answers. It ends with acceptance of what cannot be changed. I returned to my small room, my little sanctuary of solitude. I sat by the window, watching the world move around me. People laughing, couples walking hand in hand, families together. And I felt a strange peace, because I had survived what they thought would destroy me. Because even though my heart was broken, I still existed, still breathed, still lived. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't confront Sarah again. I didn't ask for closure. Closure doesn't come from them. It comes from inside. I whispered to the empty room. I loved. I trusted. I lost. And I will live anyway. And for the first time, the silence was not suffocating. It was mine. I folded my hands on my lap, closed my eyes, and let the world continue. Without me, without them, without the life I thought I had. Because some endings are quiet, some betrayals are permanent, and sometimes survival is the only victory you ever need. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. And if you want to hear more stories that touch the heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story like this.